So this is Steve, and I'm here with Phil Troyer. Phil is putting his hat into the ring for the Republican position on the primary ballot coming up in 2010 for Congressman Souder's current position.
Correct.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, Phil?
Okay, I was born in 1964 in LaGrange County. Lived in LaGrange until I was about 6 years old. My father worked in the mobile home industry, most of his life. We then moved to another little town, Etna Green, lived there for a while, and then eventually moved back to Shipshewana. I attended high school at Westview High School, went to DePauw University, received my political science degree there, then went to Capitol Hill, worked for then Congressman Coates, followed him to the Senate, then was asked to come back here to Fort Wayne to run a district office for Senator Coates and Senator Lugar. Did that. Actually, though, wanted to throw my hat in the ring at 24 to run against then Congresswoman Jill Long. Filed, but then another candidate filed right after I did by the name of Rick Hawks. It was clear to me that Rick had a lot more support than I did, and so I agreed to drop out and become his campaign manager. Managed that race. After that was unsuccessful, actually worked for my father setting up double-wide mobile homes for the summer, and then went to law school. And since then, I really thought I was out of politics completely. Other than as a first-year law student, some people asked me to run, and I think I spent less than $5,000 and was running back and forth from Bloomington to Fort Wayne. Not a very effective campaign tactic, I can tell you. But after that, thought I was out of politics completely until I started researching Congressman Souder's record, and that's why I decided to run against him.
So that kind of leads us into the next question. You know, it sounds like you've got some inside experience as far as you were on the Hill at one point.
Right.
You've set up some offices. You kind of know how it works as far as being inside the system.
Right.
What other qualifications do you think you bring to the table?
You know, I think the biggest thing is, having that Washington experience, but then, unlike so many people who go to Washington, I actually came back to Northeast Indiana. And this is where I wanted to, start my career, raise a family. I think it's a great place for that. And so I remember when I was in Washington, D.C., and I always thought, oh, people need to pay more attention to what's going on Capitol Hill. And to be honest with you, when I came back and started, a job and had a child to raise, and she had practices and things going on, I started to lose touch. And so I think I do bring that perspective of understanding how Washington works, but then also understanding what it's like for people who can only pay attention from afar and knowing what their concerns are back here in Northeast Indiana.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit. You mentioned looking at some of Congressman Souder's bills. Let's talk a little bit about what your motivations are.
Right.
I know that you rolled out your campaign announcement. You rolled out the first day the 50 bills, or the 50 documents that on spending votes that he's done. Just talk a little bit about that. Yeah,
I had worked with Congressman Souder back when it was just Mark on Capitol Hill for Congressman Coates and Senator Coates. And then, supported him when he ran and defeated Jill Long. But when he voted for the $300 billion Medicare prescription drug benefit, I started having questions about his leadership, not because of we can debate whether that was a good program or not. I think it does have some merits. The problem is, though, they didn't do anything to pay for it. They didn't offset it with spending cuts. They didn't raise taxes. And so I thought that lacked courage. If you think it's a great idea, then fund it. Don't pass it on to the next generation. So at that point, I started voting Libertarian just in Congressman Souder's race. But then when the $700 billion TARP bill, the bailout of Wall Street, when he voted for that, for me that was the last straw. I work in the financial services industry, so I know a little bit about how that worked, and just completely disagreed with how that was handled. And so at that point I started looking further into his record, and having done opposition research for campaigns before, I knew how to go in and find the votes, and was just shocked at what I saw in terms of, he is ranked, the National Taxpayers Union, it's a nonpartisan outfit that ranks every member of Congress on spending issues, and I saw that in 2008, Mark ranked at the very bottom of Republicans in the Indiana delegation, and it wasn't even close. Mike Pence was an 88, Mark Souder was a 51%. He was below the Republican average by 15 points. And then I went back and looked. It wasn't just 2008 just wasn't a bad year. It was 2007 he was at the bottom, 2006, 2005. Actually, for the last 5 years he was at the bottom. So then went in and looked at the individual votes and found the reason he had such a bad record was not just the big ones like the $700 billion TARP, but it was a lot of these pork barrel earmark bills, like $50,000 for the National Mule and Packers Museum and $200,000 for the University of Maine's Lobster Institute, and the one that upsets me the most, $2 million for the Charles S. Rangel Center for Public Policy at City College of New York. Now you would think as a Republican and as a quote-unquote fiscal conservative, the one earmark you could vote against would be an earmark for Charlie Rangel, but he couldn't even do that. And the other thing that upset me was, you know, of those 50 votes that I plastered on the board behind me at my announcement, 25 of those occurred just in 2009, and you would think with the economic downturn in 2008, the fact that millions of people are now out of work, that everybody's tightening their belt, that if there was ever a time that Congress would say, we're going to cut back on the pork barrel for now, but that's not the case. Pork barrel spending has actually exploded, and you know, Mark Souder's right there with them saying, I'm going to vote for yours, so you vote for some of mine, because that's how we all stay elected, and he just wants to continue to play that game. I think it's time for all of us to stand up and say, wait a minute, this is our government, these are our tax dollars you're wasting, we're not going to stand for this anymore. We need some serious leadership to address the real issues in this country.
Anything else that you might like to add?
You know, I hope that people can go out to my website. It's tough to get a message out, but you know, and I don't want people to think that my message is completely negative, that all I'm doing is running against Mark Souder. If you go to my website, I have on there my position on a lot of different issues, my complete resume, you know, so you can learn more about me. And by all means, I intend this to be an interactive campaign. If you have comments, criticisms even, I'm welcome to hear them. I want to hear what people are thinking, and I have a pretty thick skin, so you know, if you want to criticize me, think I'm not doing something right, by all means, let me know.
So it's really not just about Mark Souder then, from what I'm hearing?
It's not. I mean, the reason, I mean, it sounds hokey, I know, but it really is my prime motivation. The reason I'm running is when I see all of this debt being pushed onto my daughter and her generation, so our children and grandchildren, it really angers me. So when you see the passion, I'm typically not a very passionate person, but when you see that passion come out, that's what it's from, we have to put a stop to this, because as I mentioned, I work in the financial services industry, and we're already seeing the dollar collapse because of this huge federal debt. That's going to eventually lead to higher interest rates, because we're going to have to provide encouragements to foreign countries like China to support that debt, and eventually they're going to be able to hold us hostage by saying, you know, we're not going to support that debt anymore. We're going to pull the rug out from under you unless you now give us what we want. And I just think that's a very scary proposition. And so instead of worrying about, I need to make sure I get my earmark, we need Congress focusing on much bigger issues at this point.
Okay. All right. Phil, we thank you for your time.
All right. Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity.
Okay.
All right.